Hi all, today we will discuss top 50 Hibernate with Spring Data JPA, a Spring Boot related interview question. So if you are using any database connectivities or database related thing, so while we go for that, so how we will use Hibernate with a Spring Boot or a Spring Data JPA with a Spring Boot. So all are the real time interview questions. So here top 50 we collected. So the first question they will ask, interview will ask, what is Hibernate and how does it relate to the JPA? So Hibernate is a ORM tool, is a object relational mapping, and JPA is a Java persistence API. So what is Hibernate and how does it relate for the JP? The next question is, what is the main advantage of using Hibernate over JPA? JDBC. So before we used JDBC, now we used Hibernate ORM and if you are using a Spring Boot, so mostly we are using JPA, Spring Data JPA. So what all are the main advantages using Hibernate over JDBC? The next question is, what is the difference between session and entity manager? So what is session and entity manager? And the next question is, explain the Hibernate architectures. So in Hibernate architectures, we have a configuration, session factory, session transactions, query criterias, these all. So what is session factory? The next question is, what is session factory in Hibernate? What all are the different fetching strategy in Hibernate? So we have a lazy, eagers, fetchings and all. So why we are using and when to use lazy, when to use eagers and all. Now coming for this intermediate questions with this Hibernate. The next question is, how does Hibernate handle database transaction? So how we will handle the transaction sessions and all. The next question is, what is HQL? What is different from SQL? So what is the difference between SQL and HQL? SQL is a Hibernate query language and SQL is a structured query language. So what is the difference between at the rate entity annotation in JPA? The next question is at the rate entity annotation in JPA. What is that? The next question is, what is the benefit using Spring Data JPA? What all are the benefit using a Spring Data JPA? The next question is, how do you configure Hibernate in a Spring Boot application? How we will configure Hibernate in a Spring Boot application? So first we have to add the dependency in pom.xml or Gradle. Then we have to add the configuration in property or YAML file. What is at the rate repository annotation in Hibernate data JPA? What is the difference between at the rate repository at the rate component annotations? Then advanced questions related for this. The next question is, explain the difference between one to many and many to one annotations. When to use one to many, when to use many to one annotation. The next question is, how do you handle bidirectional relationship in Hibernate? One to many to one to one. So these all are or many to many mapped by attribute used like this. So what is next question is, what is at the rate query annotation in a Spring Data JPA? When to use at the rate query? The next question is, explain the concept of caching in Hibernate. How we will enable the caches? What is first level cache and what is second level caches and all. The next question is, what is entity manager factory in JPA? How to use entity manager factory in JPA? The next question is, how do you implement optimistic locking in Hibernate? At the rate, what is the use of at the rate version annotation? And the next question is, what is difference between at the rate table and at the rate entity annotation in JPA? When to use at the rate tables, when to use at the rate entity annotations and all. The next question is, what is the role of CRUD repository and JPA repository in a Spring Data JPA? Why, when to use a CRUD repository and when to use JPA repository? The next question is, how do you handle lazy loading exception in Hibernate? What is lazy loading? What is eagers loading? What is at the rate transactional annotations and all? The next question is, what is difference between inheritance strategy in JPA? So we have a single table, single per class, join table, join. single tables, table per class, like this. So what is the use of inheritance strategy in JPA? The next question is, what is the difference between at the rate ID and at the rate generated value annotation? The next question is, how do you configure a named query in Hibernate? So we have at the rate named native query, at the rate named query annotation. So what is that? When to use and all. The next question is, what is transient annotation in JPA? When to use transient annotation? Can you explain? The next question is, can you explain the one to many or many to many annotation in JPA? And what is join table annotation? The next question is, how do you perform pagination and sorting in Spring Data JPA? The next question is, what is the purpose of at the rate modifying annotation in a Spring Data JPA? The next question is, how do you handle entity lifecycle event in JPA? At the rate persistence, at the rate post persistent, at the rate pre persistent, pre removed, post update, pre update, like that. The next question is, what is difference between merge and save or update method in Hibernate? When to use merge, when to use save or update? What is the difference between composite primary key in JPA? Composite primary key at the rate embeddable, at the rate ID class annotations and all. What is it? Explain the at the rate element collection in JPA. So what all are element collection in JPA? What is at the rate element collection? The next question is, what is the role of at the rate entity listeners in JPA? The next question is, how do you implement soft delete in Hibernate? When to use soft delete in Hibernate? The next question is, what is cacheable annotation in Hibernate? And the next question is, how do you handle database schema generation in Hibernate? So we have a hibernate.hbm.2ddl auto validate, update, create drops and all. So the next question is, what is the difference between at the rate join column, at the rate primary key join column annotation? When to use this both annotations? Next question is, what explain the use of order by annotation in JPA? What is order by? The next question is, what is generated value, at the rate generated value annotation in JPA? What is and what are its strategy at the rate generated value? The next question is, how do you define custom repository method in Spring Data JPA? Next question is, how do you implement auditing in Hibernate? How do you implement auditing in Hibernate? And the next question is, what is the purpose of at the rate SQL result set mapping annotation? The next question is, explain the use of cascaded annotation Hibernate. What is the use of cascaded annotation? The next question is, how do you handle concurrency control in Hibernate? Lock mode type. The next question is, what is the role of at the rate attribute converter in JPA? The next question is, these all are the important questions. The next question is, how do you integrate testing data JPA with multiple database? If we have a multiple database, how we will integrate with this? The next question is, what is at the rate fetch annotation in Hibernate and how it is used? When to use fetch? So fetch type is a eagers or fetch type as a lazy. So what is fetch annotations? The next question is, how do you handle the batch processing in Hibernate? The next question is, what is the purpose of at the rate formula annotation in Hibernate? When to use this? And the last question is, how do you test a Spring Data JPA repository at the rate data JPA test annotation? So these all are the top 50 Spring Data JPA with Hibernate with the Spring Boot interview questions. If you are going for the Spring Boot with Data JPA related interview, then the interviewer may ask these type of questions. So this is the important top 50s 2024 interview questions. So you can take as a reference if you are preparing for the interview. Yeah, thank you.